Okay, so I haven't made a review of a single book in a couple of months, and I read a book last night. I finished it, and it completely just has taken up my entire brain's capacity of thought for the past 24 hours. So today, I'm going to sit here and yell at you about why you should read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. So Legendborn by Tracy Deonn is a contemporary fantasy based around the myths of King Arthur. Now that is probably a mythology, a lore that I know the least about. In terms of the various mythologies and lores that I know about, King Arthur was never a kind of fun story that I liked. Like, I don't remember watching even like the Disney Sword in the Stone as a kid, but Legendborn is centered around a black girl named Bree, who is our protagonist on this awesome, amazing cover, and she is going to a school in the South, and that college that she's going to kind of has some weirdness going on. She starts seeing things out of the corner of her eye, and there's some sketchy characters hanging around, and she eventually finds out that there is a house on the campus that is full of descendants of the Knights of the Round Table. I'm going to start off this review spoiler free, so if you haven't read the book yet, you can absolutely sit here and learn my opinions and thoughts, see if you want to pick it up for yourself, and then once I get to the spoilers, I will let you guys know when that happens. First and foremost, obviously, I am biased here, but my favorite thing about Legendborn is how unapologetically it focuses on the experience of a young black woman experiencing magic. Like, there are a lot of fantasy and contemporary fantasy stories that center around a character who comes from a very mundane, very normal world suddenly experiencing magic for the first time. You almost never see that framed from a black girl's point of view. Lately, there have been a lot of own voices authors putting out fantasy novels, and this was one of the first I read. Another one I read earlier this year was Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. That was also an amazing story. But this one is in a more contemporary setting, and I relate to the main character, Bree Matthews, so much. Her entire arc focuses on the fact that she very recently lost her mother, and the circumstances around her mother's death are very mysterious, and so she's going to her mother's alma mater college, and she wants to make friends and kind of move on from her mother's death, but then as she gets entangled with this Arthurian society, she starts to notice details about her mother's death that don't quite add up, and so she's trying to now figure out the mystery of whether or not her mother's death is actually an accident, or if there's some magical wrongdoing going on. And aside from Bree, this book is so diverse. Like, Bree's best friend is Asian, and among the various other squires and pages and kids who are part of this society that is all descendants of King Arthur and the Round Table Knights, there are non-binary characters, there are bisexual characters, there are gay characters. There is one straight white male character in this entire book. At the same time, the book focuses so much on the experience of being a minority, especially in a college in the South, where even the whole school's history and everything around you is surrounded in this horrible colonialist history. I mean, obviously there's something in America that we can't deny. I'm living in the South right now, and it's very prominent when you drive through certain states or certain areas down here, like the billboards and like the plantations that are now like tourist destinations. This book focuses a lot on the fact that all of these big grand things that we know and love and worship has such a dark history that still affects people to this day. And even like the Knights at the Round Table, for instance, were all white men and very much were at a time period where slavery was a thing, where people of color were subservient, where queer people were not allowed to exist, and this book does not shy away from those themes at all, and I love that it is brought to light in a way that is impactful and a center point of the story without it being a preachy message, because it's not from the point of view of a character who's like, oh, I'm different from the people who did those bad things. It is from the point of view of a character who experienced those things firsthand. And Bree Matthews is like the strongest character I have experienced in such a long time. Reading from her point of view really got to me, just dug deep into my heart, mind, and soul. I don't know if it's just a universal like black girl experience of what Bree Matthews goes through, but even everything down to her daily routine of like how she does her hair in the shower when she has like to schedule her wash days, or like how certain comments from her peers affect her in ways that don't affect her best friend or her white friends. And also the fact that she's in this big old magical, fantastical, enchanted college that's full of knights and squires. And so as Bree works her way up the ranks of this King Arthur society, she obviously meets our massive cast of characters who are all the most lovable characters I've like ever experienced. I don't think I've ever had an ensemble of characters this big. There's like 20 minor characters that have names and personalities and purposes in this story, and I loved every single one of them. But of course, I'm going to draw the most attention to Bree's two potential love interests. And yes, I will preface this by saying this book does contain the sprinklings of a love triangle, and love triangles are typically typically not my thing, but I liked this one a lot. So, do you ever read romance where you have to like sit and close the page and like take a deep breath and like pace around your room and calm down for a second because it was just like so cute and so sweet? I had that moment like 6 different times in this book. And this book doesn't focus entirely on the romance, but that is a big part of the plot. And again, I'm not one who really likes a romantic plot that seems like forced or seems unnecessary, and this one fit so well, and I'll get into more of that in the spoiler section as to why I loved the romance in this book so much. I also love just the various relationships between like platonic love, familial love, friendship. There were so many different kinds of bonds and strengths and weaknesses in the various kinds of relationships. Like for instance, at one point in the story, Bree starts to see a therapist at her school who is also a Black woman, and there is talk about how typically in Black families like therapy isn't a thing that is encouraged or a thing that people do, and the fact that Bree bonds with her therapist over simply the fact that they're both Black women living in this city, attending / working at this college that's majority white. Alice, who is Bree's best friend, is Asian, and so both of the girls at one point like face disciplinary action for something they did at the school, and Bree is treated worse by the school's dean than Alice is, and everyone assumes that Bree is like only there on scholarship or only there because of affirmative action, whereas they think Alice earned her way into the school because she's Asian and because Bree is Black. And despite the fact that that does cause some conflict between them, they have been best friends since childhood, and that friendship and that strength and bond between them, it just completely transcends any kind of bias that they're getting from their classmates, their peers, or their professors. And Bree also has a really lovely relationship with her father. Obviously, following the death of her mother, the two of them are going to have to cope with the loss of their loved one, and especially because Bree is a 16-year-old going off to college early, it creates this kind of rift between her and her father where she can't tell him about everything, especially about all the magical stuff going on at school, but her father obviously cares about her and loves her and wants her to be safe and protected and happy, but there's this obstacle they have to get over of both mourning the loss of a mother and wife while also moving on in life because it's been a couple months and they need to learn to deal with that grief and trauma and loss. And then of course the biggest plot line is the descendants of King Arthur and each of their like initiates into this secret society of knights that I can't even really get into detail with without spoiling the plot. One thing that bothers me is when there's a massive cast of characters and none of them get enough development, but I felt like each of the minor characters in this had a level of development that was not forced on us. It wasn't like overly like we have to know the backstory of every single person here, but each of them got just a little bit of enough for us to think like, oh, these are real people who are just kind of on the periphery of Bree's overall goal and intention here in the story, and they are all important players at some point or another, but ultimately the side characters don't like take over the plot. But the main point I can make about the actual action adventure plot is that Bree Matthews is a hero. And again, you don't get to see a lot of young Black girls be the centerfold hero of the story. You don't get to see them take charge and lead a group to victory. You don't get to see them be more than a side character most of the time. And instead, all the other side characters are the one who come to Bree because it's her story. And just the fact that it took me this long to find a fantasy story where a Black girl was the main character, and that her experience, and that she's not just there for the sake of tokenism, like her story, her experience is a Black experience, and she cannot just be replaced with any other character. There are a lot of times when fantasy and fiction is written so that the reader can place themselves in the shoes of the main character, but this isn't a universal kind of story. And in this case, not everyone can place themselves into Bree Matthews' shoes. And I like that because it's not just a generic fantasy, it is something that is so specific and so personal to the experience of so many different people who finally get to see someone like themselves on the page. And that is the main reason why I loved Legendborn so much. Not only that, but the writing was amazing, the story was amazing, everything about it was great. I gave it 5 stars. I did a super long review of it on Goodreads, and now I'm going to talk about all the spoilers in this book. So if you haven't read it or if you want to wait to read it, go ahead and click away now. But if you want to hear me gush about every little detail, here we go. I'm gonna get it out of the way right now. I am not a fan of love triangles whenever it's just 2 guys competing over a girl or 1 girl in love with 2 guys. But the kind of love triangle where there's 2 guys who both like a girl, one of the guys also likes one of the other guys, then it gets interesting. And the moment I read the description of Selwyn Kane, I was like, oh no, he's gonna be one of those characters, you know, like the Rhysand type, the Cardan type. And like he is, but he's different. I'm justifying my love for him because I'm not gonna be one of those girls. I'm not gonna be one of those girls who obsesses over the Rhysand's and the Cardins of the literary world. Selwyn Kane got me, you guys. He got me. And I was shocked because I searched his name on Twitter and Tumblr to see if people were making posts about him the way they do about those other broody, tall, dark boy characters. And there's nothing. No one knows he exists. So right now he's kind of just mine to enjoy his existence. Obviously, I don't own any fictional characters. That was weird. I'm not gonna say that. But I loved his character so much. At first introduction, I was like, oh no. But then by the end of it, once we realize, his relationship with Nick, once we see his, strange attraction to Bree, the fact that he's part incubus, I knew we were probably gonna get some kind of fantasy fairy tale creatures, and I had a feeling that he was something weird, but that's a new one for me. Typically they're just hot and broody, and that's just how they are as a person. No, it's in his DNA. And I'm also gonna talk about Nick for a second because he is perfection on a silver platter. The moment I read his character description for the first time, again, the writing in this book is so good that at the first description I was yep, I'm in love with these characters. But Nick, the way she describes his demeanor, his posture, his boyish attitude, I was just oh no, I'm in love with another fictional character. I'm so glad he turned out to be a good person. I'm so glad they both turned out to be good people. Again, you usually don't see that. You usually see one of them's kind of a jerk, and then one of them's super sweet, and one's hot but one's cute. No, they're both wonderful. Again, you don't usually get to see a black girl experience a cute as hell romance like that, much less the inkling of a sort of a love triangle with another equally as eligible male character. I was projecting hard on Bree when I was reading this, you guys. I am not even ashamed of it. And this book is so diverse. Like I said, there's only one straight male character, and that is Nick. We have a non-binary side character. We have Alice, who is a lesbian. We have William, who is gay. We have Tor and Selwyn, who are both bi. Literally, there's one straight white man. And then everyone else. And yet again, the story takes place in a college in North Carolina where they're really not known for being super accepting of people who are queer or people of color. We don't just see from Bree's point of view the bigotry, the racism, the homophobia, the lack of acceptance for people who are different. We see it in each of these characters, little inklings, little sprinklings of oh, well, I kept it a secret, or oh, I'm not super out, or oh, I'm just used to the way people look at me and the way people treat me, from all of these characters. And as someone who did personally attend a college that was majority white. In fact, I looked up my college's statistics and it just says 24% minority and doesn't break it down any further than that. But as a former student, I can tell you that my college, of that 24% minority, was probably 20% Asian and Latinx. I guarantee there's probably 4% black kids. And in fact, of my 10 classes I took freshman year, I don't recall having a single other black kid in any of them. So this story, in that regard, was very personal to me. And also, the entire backstory of Bree and her powers. Now, we learn later in the story that Bree is actually the descendant of King Arthur, and that Nick, though we were first convinced that he was a descendant of King Arthur, is actually a descendant of Lancelot, who was King Arthur's right-hand knight. And that is why their bond is so strong, or at least that's why Bree suspects that their bond is so strong. But more importantly, Bree finds out that she is a descendant of King Arthur because her ancestor, who was a slave, was raped and conceived a child by her master, who was a descendant of King Arthur, and he tried to force her to get rid of the baby because he knew that that baby would have power. And that is another thing that really hit me hard, because especially with Columbus Day, with Indigenous Peoples Day having recently passed, and thinking of all the events that have happened in the world this year, I have been thinking a lot about my own family history. And I know for a fact that I am Indigenous and West African, but I cannot trace my family roots back because that history is lost because of where we grew up and the history of this country and how they treated my ancestors. And that is something that really does not get talked about. You can have friends who can trace back their history for generations and generations. I mean, these kids, they're descendants of King Arthur and the knights, and they can trace back every single name, whereas black kids, their grandparents, great-grandparents, and that's as far back as we can go. And that's not just some kind of fantasy element to make it, ooh, a big surprise and mystery that she doesn't know her heritage. That's just the universal experience of being a person of color in America or anywhere in the world. world, really. It's a sad, harsh reality, and the story doesn't shy from making it known that that is the way the world has worked. There's obviously, whenever Bree's mother first dies, there's suspicion that it was probably foul play or that maybe some kind of police brutality involved, and even though we figure out later that that wasn't the case, that's still a very real possibility that that could have happened, and that's why Bree is so determined to find out the truth, because if she doesn't, and if something sketchy or wrong may have been the cause of her mother's death and she didn't do anything about it, like, she would have felt the personal guilt of not being able to stop that cycle of abuse and brutality happening to women who look like her. And then the story also touches on just generational trauma in general, with the way Bree's mother was overprotective of her, because Bree's mother knew that she had her powers and she knew that she'd be special, and also because of the generational curse that was placed on their family that only one daughter at a time could harness that power. So therefore, once Bree's powers came to light, her mother died. It happened the same thing whenever Bree's mother first discovered her powers, her mother had died, and so on and so forth. This has been happening for a few generations. And so because her mother wanted to keep her safe and keep her protected, she was overprotective to a fault. She sheltered her, she was very hard on her, she was so adamant about wanting her daughter to succeed that she didn't allow for failure. And that is also a very dangerous but also just very common thing that happens in Black families. I mean, when your parents live through historical events that show that people who look like you don't get treated well in this world, they're going to be harder on you because they want you to develop a thick skin. They want you to be strong and brave and stand up for yourself. They want you to be the smartest you can and the best you can, because that's what you need to succeed in this world. There is no average, there is no okay, there is no scraping by as a Black kid. You have to be the best, or else people aren't going to take you seriously. You aren't going to be able to protect yourself. Again, that's just something that hits so hard. Like, even whenever Bree and Alice at the beginning of the story, they go off to this party at the rock quarry and they get in trouble with the dean, Bree's father immediately is on the phone, and he is like, he's angry, of course, but more than that, he's scared for his daughter. He's scared of the consequences she's going to face. He's scared of how it's going to affect her life, because any one mistake could literally be life or death. And that's not just like, oh, she could have hurt herself at the party. Like, no, if she ran into the wrong person or said or did the wrong thing, it could have meant something really horrible. And so combine all of that with the fact that Bree Matthews, a 16-year-old Black girl, is the descendant of King Arthur, the wielder of Excalibur, the savior of all of these knights. Like that hit me so hard in a way that I can't even, I'm literally gonna start crying. Like, again, I've never been able to actually read a story like that with a girl like me as the hero. Like, that just doesn't happen. She's always a side character. She's always the sassy best friend. She's always the one there for some advice. She's never the one to pull the sword from the stone and take down the villain. And it just felt great to actually see that. So, yep, here we go. Nope, we're gonna get to our notes. We're not gonna do this. What else did I want to say? Oh, I wanted to get the tears out of my eyes. I wanted to touch on the fact that I said earlier about the love triangle, that I love when they're different, because I've talked about it on this channel a couple times, and I'm pretty sure people are convinced that I'm like poly. I'm not personally, but I am very supportive of it. And I love it when love triangles have the dynamic where, like, they could end up in any combination of the three of them and all just still be happy. So the fact that Nick loves Bree and Bree loves Nick, but Bree also really likes Selwyn and Selwyn loves Nick, I'm all for it. I am 100% here for it. I cannot wait to see how this love triangle turns out. Obviously, I'm not going to keep my hopes up for polyamory, but, like, if it happens, I won't be mad about it. Oh, that was some emotional whiplash I just went through there. So yeah. Sorry, that's just so funny to me. Yeah, how do I end this? And last but not least, I do want to say, I know I talked about a lot of heavy things in this video. I mentioned some very personal things in this video, and that isn't to say that if you can't relate to this story on a personal level that you shouldn't read it or you shouldn't enjoy it. Quite the opposite, actually. Even if you can't relate to this story, or if you don't feel any way personally about these kinds of themes, read it anyway, because this is how diverse stories get created. This is how diverse characters come to be, because when we support books like this, even if it's not necessarily our story or our history, we are showing the world that these stories are important. And so I would urge all of you to please borrow Legendborn from your local library, get it from your local indie bookshop, because showing the world that these stories are important to people, that they resonate with people, that people enjoy reading them, just means that these stories become more accessible to people who may really want them or need them in their lives. And so, yeah. I just want to thank Tracy Deonn for writing Legendborn, and I want to thank you all for sitting through that, because I just went through a lot of emotions in the past 20 minutes. So thank you for that. Highly recommend this book. 5-star read from me. Absolutely go pick it up if you have the time. And with that, I am done with this book review, and we'll be moving on to hopefully something that doesn't tug at my heartstrings so much. Or maybe it will. I don't know. We'll see. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.